Hello, and welcome to Thrills, Chills, and Red Herrings, things that make you go, ooh, and want to read more. I'm your moderator, Al Pessin. I write the Task Force Epsilon thriller series for Kensington. Those books are Sandblast, Blowback, and Shockwave, which comes out in January. For about the next hour, these wonderful authors arrayed around me on the screen will share their secrets, some of their secrets anyway, for writing books that convince readers to keep reading. This will be good information for writers and a little inside information for readers. Everyone's bio is on the BookFest website, but I'll give them a short introduction as we go around for the first time. First up is physician by day, award-winning author by night. That's Alexia Gordon. She writes the Gethsemane Brown mystery series and hosts the podcast, The Cozy Corner. Her latest book is the fifth in the series, Execution in E. Welcome, Alexia. Tell us, what are some of the techniques that you use to keep your readers turning the pages, particularly between chapters?
Well, but I kind of think of chapters as thinking back how I read, especially when I was coming up before I published my first book. You know, a chapter was always a good place to stop, especially if you're reading at night. You know, you go into bed, just one more chapter, because you either have to get up for school in the morning or get up for work in the morning. So it was always a good stopping place. But in a really good book, you also didn't want to stop. So I kind of look at the chapters as places where I have enough of a cliffhanger where you really don't want to stop, but if you absolutely positively have to, because it's like SATs the next morning or something that you just can't possibly go without sleep, then you could actually put your bookmark there and pick it up the next day as soon as you were out of your test and keep reading and not have lost the story. But you would really feel bad about putting that bookmark in there because you really want to go and find out how that cliffhanger actually ends.
So you don't mind them actually going to sleep as long as they're really motivated to come back.
Yes, I don't want anybody failing their exams or anything like that. So I don't mind if you have to sleep. It's okay.
That'd be a great complaint to get in a chat room somewhere. You made me flunk my test because I couldn't put your book back. All right. Well, we heard from the doctor. Let's move on to the paratrooper. I'll give you 3 seconds to guess who that is, and I'm guessing you won't have picked Stacey Woodson, former soldier, prolific and multi-award winning short story writer, and part-time actor. And that sounds like a whole interview by itself, Stacey, but we'll do that another time. A few months ago, she published a novella, 2 Tamales, 1 Tokarev, and A Lifetime of Broken Promises. Stacey, what's your go-to secret for keeping readers engaged? Do you throw characters out of a plane and make readers keep reading to find out if the parachute opened?
It's fun. I did write a short story about a paratrooper. It's funny that you mentioned that. But the big thing for me is finding a character I really like. I start with character, somebody who has an interesting background. My recent story has a ex-con turned prison minister. And then I try to find a universal thing readers can relate to, whether it be love or loyalty or somebody, in the case of my recent book, the character really wants to protect her brother. And then I try to ask a question at the beginning of the story that the reader really wants answered, and I wait as long as possible to answer that question. So it's the way I try to craft my stories.
So it's a combination of sort of the short term and the long term.
Yes.
Interesting. So let's see, look around the screen. We have a scientist and a songwriter-screenwriter. The scientist is Carole Stivers, a biochemist who worked in medical diagnostics and uses her background in her science fiction. Her debut novel, The Mother Code, explores such weighty issues as the limits of AI and the meaning of motherhood, told largely through the eyes of a little boy. Carole, the scientific method is all about going down a pathway that either leads to a solution or a dead end, forcing the investigator to try a different pathway. Is that reflected in your books and how you bring readers along on the adventure?
So, yeah, I thought a lot about this. I think, in its kind of purest form, the scientific method, you make an observation, create a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, rinse and repeat. It's kind of in that ideal world, it would offer a lot of solace, because you know that if you go down the wrong path, you can always reverse course when the facts disagree with what you hypothesized. But in the real world, you have a lot more to contend with when you're doing science, and some of it is ego. Some of that ego is your own ego. There's things like fears, emotions, deadlines. There's unintended consequences. There's multiple truths depending on who's doing the peer review. So, in the end result is a sort of bastardized scientific method where sound decisions are swayed by human factors. But I think that's where things get really interesting. So, in my novel, the scientific method is used to develop a non-viral biowarfare agent. But then, of course, in the real world, that doesn't behave anywhere near like it's supposed to, and human survival is threatened. So the scientists have to, number one, develop genetically engineered children who can survive the thing that they've created, and also create robots to bring up the children, because they don't suppose there's going to be any adults left. And then in the end, despite the fact that they thought that they were all going to die, some of them do survive, and they decide that robots shouldn't be bringing up children. So then they say, okay, we're going to have to destroy the robots. And Kai is the boy you're talking about, and he decides that he'd better defend his mother against this. So it kind of creates a conflict. And I think
well,
so
you
in the
do
mother
have
code,
people going, starting down one path and then veering to another path, trying to solve the original problem as well as problems that come up. So that's something that's going to keep readers engaged.
yeah, I think the trajectory of the scientists in the early parts of the story are very much like that. And then afterwards, I would say the second half of the story, things kind of devolve. And I want to say that I used Alexia's method, a lot of cliffhangers at the end of chapters. And also I tried to make the story familiar enough that, people would see themselves in it, despite the fact that it's so weird. We're all either mothers or had mothers, and we understand the parent-child relationship. And so you kind of see yourself, and you see settings that maybe you've been to, things like that. The familiar, it kind of draws you in.
It gets to what Stacy was talking about, that, everybody has loves and everybody has fears, and there are questions people want to have asked. So that helps pull a reader through a story. That's good. Last up at the moment is singer, songwriter, screenwriter. I'm not singer. You're not a singer. Are you a singer?
Yeah.
He is a singer. Okay. Singer, songwriter, and screenwriter turned author John Palisano. He's the only person on the panel who's been a creative for his whole career. He has a long list of publications, including novels and short stories. His latest is a novella called Glass House, an exploration of grief and memory told in poetry, lyrics, and prose. So, okay, there's, again, a whole other interview to be done there. But for our current topic, John, for you, let me ask, how is this idea of keeping the thread going manifested differently depending on what you're writing, whether it's verse to verse, scene to scene, or chapter to chapter? Is it the same or is it different?
I think there's a lot of similarities in all kinds of creative works as far as telling a story. You could tell, obviously, some of our favorite songs are stories. Poems can be stories, of course. Fiction, great nonfiction tells a story too, has beginning, middle, and ends, and cliffhangers in it as well. One of we've kind of mentioned cliffhangers, and that's one method. And in songwriting, there's a method called don't bore us, get to the chorus. Which is, it's kind of goofy, but it makes sense because we've all heard those songs and you're kind of waiting for the hook. Yeah. And if there's no hook after a point, you kind of go, oh, what's going on? You kind of want to, where's this going? Yeah. Same with fiction. You kind of want to just kind of keep things going. And I think the biggest thing for me in any of my creative endeavors is to try to keep people guessing. Because the worst thing for me as a reader or somebody who's experiencing a movie or anything is if I'm watching a movie and I know how it's going to end in the first 10 minutes, I start tuning out. And I think we all do. And that we do the same thing with a book or a song. If we kind of know where things are going and there's nothing to surprise us, we kind of back out of it. And we're, I don't know if this isn't working for me. It's a do not finish for me, maybe. And I think that kind of doesn't have to be an extreme thing either. It can be a subtle thing. It could be something small like, oh, there was a little character that went into a doorway before we ended the chapter, but it went somewhere else. But then people are thinking, hey, what happened to that little dude that went into the little, So trying to keep people like engaged in that is really kind of paramount for me of making them kind of hopefully stay engaged into a story.
That's a great segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is red herrings. And honestly, this is something I have a little bit of a problem with mystery writers out there. So here's the thing. How do you use a red herring, a false clue, to keep the story interesting without alienating readers, making them mad that they went down this road for some period of time and it led nowhere? And also without losing your credibility as a storyteller, where every time you drop a hint, people start to think, well, that's obviously a red herring. So how do you balance those two? Let's start with Alexia.
Well, I'm helped somewhat by my mysteries are in more of the traditional vein. So people are kind of used to, folks like Agatha Christie and their red herrings. So if I throw red herrings in, it just kind of fits. So they're willing to cut me a little bit of slack because, the people that read that type of book, red herrings is part of the fun. But, like you said, so that you don't blow your credibility, you can't overdo it. There's always that balance. 1 or 2 red herrings, people are going to stick with it. 8 red herrings, they're just going to say like, well, this is ridiculous. Everything is I can't follow this through at all and don't do it. So and there's no magic number, but you kind of get a sense for a balance of like, hey, I'm X amount of way through the book. Some of these clues better be actually pointing towards the real solution and not just in there, as smoke and mirrors. Because by now people are probably onto the smoke and mirrors, and you've passed the point where you can continue to get away with that.
Stacey, do you make use of red herrings very much?
I like to call them. Yeah, I think I do. I think I use misdirection. I think the key is when the reader finishes the story, they can go back and look at all the clues and realize the ending was inevitable. And I think if you do your job as a writer and you lay that out, the red herrings can be enjoyable. So I think that for me, using plants and reveals throughout the story is more the way I approach it. I think if it becomes inevitable at the end, and then they're delighted by the twist, they're delighted by the red herrings, they're delighted by the idea that they were kind of misdirected because they can see those pieces and parts all come together at the end.
Yeah, that's really the hard part, is not to make it clear in the first 10 minutes, as John said, but also make it satisfying in the end, as you said. We've been joined by T.L. Bequette, and welcome, T.L. T.L. is a lawyer who defends murderers and works for justice system reform in his day job and uses his expertise to bring real-world issues to his fiction. His debut novel is Good Lookin, which tracks a presumably good-looking criminal defense attorney working on a nearly unsolvable case. T.L., congratulations on your debut. And I want to go back and ask you the first question that I asked everybody a couple of minutes ago, which is, what do you do to keep your stories moving? Are your techniques inspired by real-life courtroom drama and developments, or are they designed to make the sometimes slow-moving justice system a little more dynamic?
Thanks, first of all, for having me, Al, and good afternoon to everyone. A lot of what I write is drawn from my experiences in court. However, I have to say that usually the first question I have to ask, given some of the shenanigans that go on in court, is, would anyone ever believe this would actually happen? Because the truth really is, in my world, stranger than fiction. As far as how to keep the book moving, I got some advice from a very good writer a long time ago, and that advice was that you have to have your protagonist, or at least someone for whom the reader is rooting to be in great distress just about all the time. I try to keep that in mind. And also, I think it helps me every so often to go back and do some reading, right? To figure out, gee, what's been happening here in this last chapter and a half? Anything, other than just sort of advancing the storyline. And when the answer to that question is not much, then it's time to have something happen.
Well, I wanted to ask about that. Have something happen. I mean, is it more about plot, or is it more about characters, caring about what happens to the character? Or is it more about something happening that sort of happens to the character? John, what do you think? Is it more about plot or more about characters in terms of bringing readers through a story?
I think ideally it's about both working simultaneously. To use another song analogy, plot would be the backbone, the drum beat, and the characters would be your melody. You can have one without the other, one can dominate, but ideally when they're both in tune with each other, you're working with fire there. I'm a big character person myself. I do a lot of character work because I also I come from an acting background, so I did a lot of like character development in that regard, and I love that aspect of it. But I'm also a plotter. I think plot is really important too. So long as if you outline, you listen to your characters and your plot too, and you're okay if they take a diversion too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Carole, in your book, you have human characters, adults and kids, and you also have robot characters.
Yeah.
So that must have been a challenge to do you want your readers to care about the robots who are so wonderful at the beginning, and then sort of, well, not to give away anything about your book, but there are problems with the robots as we go along. So how do you deal with that in both character and plot terms?
So in that case, I agree with John that the characters and plot are both very important, and I tell you wouldn't care about Indiana Jones without Indiana Jones, right? For example, I mean, just as one of many examples, you got to have that character whose name you remember, who you care about. But in my case, I made the robots are their personalities are based on the personalities of real women, and so that kind of gives the reader some empathy with them. The women have passed away, and these are all that's left of them is these robots, and so that's how I kind of gave life to the mothers, other than their interactions with the children are so dear and sweet that they are there to kind of nurture them at every point along the way. So I like to think that I've been told that at the end the readers do care about the bots a lot, and I wanted them to. Yeah,
Stacy, character or plot?
B and F. That's a tough question. Again, I think I agree with John, but I also want to add that when I think of the books that are memorable to me, it's not the plot, it's the character. I felt something in me as I was reading it, so I will remember the character, but not necessarily the cool twist. So I think character is extremely important. And it goes back to your first question about keeping the readers turning the pages. You find something that you almost see something in yourself in that character, and you want to know what you care about, what happens to them. So I start with a character, but I also have to outline certain plot points so that my story holds together.
It also has to do with whether things happen to your main characters or whether your main characters make things happen. Do you think about that, Alexia, when you're writing as to how much they're reacting and how much they're directing the action?
All the time. That's actually the main question I ask, and I fall squarely on your main character needs to be the one making things happen. We all know people that things just kind of happen to, and while we may feel sorry for them, they're not necessarily the most interesting people that we'd want to read about for 200 or 300 pages. When we think of the stories that stick with us. We'll use Carole's Indiana Jones example. We remember him because he did stuff. He didn't sit around waiting for someone to bring him, a treasure. He went out and found it and got into all kinds of trouble while he was doing it. So when I am plotting a Gethsemane Brown novel, I always have to stop and think, how is Gethsemane going to drive the action that's about to happen, and not just sit there and let something happen to her so that she's just constantly reacting. She has to be active and the driver of the story.
Yeah, I one of the best pieces of advice I got was from a friend of mine who teaches writing at Stanford. And he said that I should make my character the smartest person in the room, and that she should be the one that the readers rely on to understand what's happening, and she should be the one who comes up with the ideas for counteracting the terrorists or moving forward with whatever they're doing. So I thought that was a really important piece of advice. TL, do you think about this active character, passive character issue, and how it helps draw the reader through the novel?
I do, and I have to agree with Alexia, and I didn't always. The Joe Turner character in my stories is a guy who kind of lets life happen to him, and I think that's okay for a protagonist. But I remember relating the story to an agent once. And at the end, the agent said, so how does it end? And I said, well, it ends just like that. Nothing really happens. He just kind of mopes off and is depressed. And she correctly told me, no, you idiot, something's got to happen. He's got to solve the case, get the girl, get off his ass and do something. And so while I think you can have a character who lets life happen to him, even those characters have to be proactive at some point.
Yeah, in the one theory of writing called the hero's journey, I think it's called Return with Elixir, where the character in the final scenes has come to a realization and attacks the problem with renewed energy and succeeds, presumably, or at least has a partial success, leading to perhaps the sequel. So, okay, this is also related to another issue that writers have to pay attention to, and that I can tell you for sure editors pay attention to, and that is pacing and how you move from one event to another, and how that differs among genres. So, John, what do you try to achieve through pacing, and how does that differ among the different media that you work in?
Well, I think that it's applicable across all media if you're creating things. And there's a method in screenwriting, get in late and get out early of a scene, which basically, I'm sure everybody's heard of that, but I really believe in that, with not lingering too long, and knowing where a scene really starts and knowing where it's going to end effectively to keep your reader engaged. And I think there's an art to that, and that comes with just a lot of experience and time and being able to make those hard cuts too, because we all fall in love with some of our writing and our descriptions of setting a room or something like that. But it's good to, realize when you don't really need as much in that regard. So,
but you know what? When I've tried to do that, get in late, get out early,
okay,
then I find that, a chapter that I thought was going to be 20 pages is now 5 pages, and now I need to come up with a lot more stuff to write about in order to get to the total I have to have. So how do you deal with that?
Write the story first. You can always go in later and, do more work later to punch things up if you need to. And I think we're in a great time, because for a long time you had to hit a certain word count with publishers. They wanted book spines to be a certain length. And I think now, if you go into the bookstores, that's not the case anymore. We've got a lot of options as far as word length. I mean, we're seeing novels on that are like 20,000 words long on the bestseller lists and in the racks, and it's great. And we're seeing much longer ones too. So that's kind of the internet has kind of made a big difference in that regard. So I would say to write your story first and see how, and make it as good as you can make it, whether that's 30,000 words or 60,000 words or 85,000.
I have to say that when I first started writing, I wrote really quick, and everything would just happen. And what happened with me was my agent said, "You're not dwelling long enough with some really heavy stuff here." So she made me go back and live with it for a little bit and add word count that way. So that was an eye opener to me because I was a new writer and I was trying to make something that was fast paced and I thought that the fewer words the better. But she said, "You know what? Somebody just died and you just went on, so don't do that." So that's part of pacing that I had to learn, is to slow down every now and then.
What do we think? Short chapters or long chapters? My editor once told me about this concept of potato chip chapters, that, you eat one, you can't just eat one, you have to eat another one and another one, and they're so small and easy. Would you say, by show of hands, short chapters or long chapters? Short chapters. Longer chapters. And John got in there at the end. Why longer chapters, Alexia?
I mean,
you don't want people to go to sleep, I remember.
that too, but mostly because of the genre that I write in. I mean, cozy and traditional mysteries, and it kind of ties in with pacing. The pace tends to be a little slower, and readers want you to dwell more on the settings and the side characters. I mean, there's some cozy readers who have admitted they don't even care about the actual mystery. They are more interested in the small town or the quirky best friend. And so it's just the type of thing that you're writing. The people reading that want you to dwell on it, and they want things to be at a different pace. I wouldn't expect some high octane thriller to have chapters as long as an English village cozy. So I have to kind of couch my answer. It depends on the genre. So for what I'm writing, the longer chapters work better. Whereas if you had potato chip chapters, in a small bucolic village, it wouldn't seem very bucolic. It'd be more frenetic and fast paced, like a city. Which is okay if you're writing about a city, but if you're writing about an Irish country village, you want it to feel like you're in an Irish country village with a slower pace.
One of the more surprising requests I ever got from an editor was, I had my character arrive at Guantanamo Bay to visit a prisoner, and I had done that myself, and so I knew what you had to do. You have to take a ferry from the airport across the main part of the base, and then you drive through what looks like an American suburb, which is on the southeast coast of Cuba, and then she got to where the guy was. So I wrote that very briefly, and the surprising thing that my editor said was, "Oh, tell me more about that. That's so interesting, what it looks like at Guantanamo Bay." But that was a complete sort of page and a half detour from the story, which was, she had to see this guy and convince him to do something. So, okay, back to short chapters, long chapters, description. Carole, what do you think? You raised your hand for short chapters.
Yeah, I did. I tend to use short chapters mostly towards the end to kind of speed up the pace, to kind of,
so you vary the pace. That's good.
Yeah, you're like 3/4 in, and so the longer chapters, it just happens this way. I start out with longer chapters because you have more to tell the reader, and then as time goes on, you're building up tension and pressure, and the shorter chapters seem to work better. And I just finished a book by my friend. It's over my shoulder here. It's called The Bakersfield Boys Club. Excellent mystery, and it used that. I think your books do that, where they kind of start with the shorter chapters at the end, and it's like I can't stop, and I like to digest them that way. Yeah.
Yeah. TL, did you go through a short chapter, long chapter issue with your editor?
Somewhat. So I tend to write, I don't know about everyone else, but I tend to think of my chapters as scenes. Maybe because I watched so much television as a kid. But that's the way I picture my chapters, and that's how I write. And that lends itself to fairly short chapters, pretty short, 1,000 words, maybe 1,500 words at the most. And that used to be, not the norm at all. And that was a source of consternation for me. And so I would set up on, well, maybe I can cobble these chapters together to make it longer. And then I think it was David Baldacci came along and said, well, you can just write 500 word chapters, you're fine. And I said, fantastic. So for me, it's just kind of the way I write, and it makes sense.
Stacey, I want to go back for a broader discussion of something you mentioned a little bit earlier about endings. And you said something very similar to a quote from a mentor that I was going to put in, which is that the ending should be surprising but inevitable. In other words, the reader would say, oh, gee, I didn't see that coming, but I should have. That's the way it had to end. So let's go around real quick and start with Stacey. What makes a good ending? And also, how and when do you decide what the ending will be?
I like a good twist. That definitely has to be at the end. And then it just really depends on what I'm writing. I mean, if I'm writing noir, things just get worse, go from bad to worse. If I'm writing a thriller, you want good to triumph over evil. And so there are some things that I think reader expectations require in terms of your ending. But I usually know my ending when I start. I have to. And I have to know key turning points. I can pants in some of the in-between stages, which I think is important for me for character development to let things flow naturally. But I definitely need to know what I'm building towards, and that includes the ending. And sometimes I won't even start writing until I know the twist that I really want to deliver, and then I try to build up to the twist at the end.
You ever change your mind about what the ending is while you're writing?
I have before, but it's unusual. Sometimes some things feel inevitable. And like we were talking about, you decide something and then you're building up your character. And then you're really like, no, she really has to sacrifice everything to make this arc be complete at the end.
I once saw a social media post from a friend of mine who writes mysteries, and she was telling her friends and presumably her readers, oh, I'm 90% through with my new book, and I think I just decided it's a different person who's the murderer. And I did not understand that. Alexia, do you understand that?
I'm going to guess that person's a pantser, because I know some pantsers who say things like
right,
that.
Let's go back. Let's define our term for the non-authors out there, because Stacey used it too. Pants as a verb.
Yes, it's
seat of the pants. Writing by the seat of your pants, or planning and plotting out your novel. Those are the sort of two schools of thought. And of course, some people do a bit of both, as Stacey mentioned, as I do. So, okay, Alexia, do you understand my friend's post? 90% through, and I think the murderer is a different person than what I started out thinking.
Yes, I understand the writers who go by the seat of their pants. I'm not one of those writers. I'm actually, there's a third category, a plantser. These are all terms that came out of NaNoWriMo, if anyone's wondering. That's coming up every
National
November.
Novel Writing Month.
Right. I have to start at the end, because if I start writing without knowing where I'm going, I end up lost in the weeds somewhere. Nothing makes any sense, and most of it gets thrown away. So I usually don't actually change my end. I will often change my beginning, because I realize, like, hey, I'm starting this in the wrong place, because I'm never going to get to point B if that's my point A. So my end, like, I have to know who did it, how they did it, and why they did it, and then I can work my way there, and the stuff ahead of it can change, but that the end, once I have that, generally stays the same.
John, what do you think? Planner or pantser? Change the ending 90% of the way through?
What is the word, the in-between word, the plantser?
Plantser.
I make like very extensive outlines and character development sheets and all kinds of things and maps and what have you. And I swear almost every book I've ever written at the 3/4 mark, it goes haywire and we're off the outline and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, what just happened? Where's my, you guys, what are you doing here? you're off the map. But I have to go with it. That's my job. They're working for me at that point, so that's that.
So do you change the ending, and then have to go back and rewrite stuff that came before so that it all lines up correctly now?
Usually not. Usually it's probably a better ending than I usually have thought of, or it's just maybe slightly askew, or maybe it'll end in a moment that I wasn't expecting it was going to end. Like when I was originally, pictured the book, there might have been some big ending scene I thought that was going to be the end, and then I realized, you know what? This other thing is actually going to be a stronger place to go with this. So just being open to that can be. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I wanted to ask Carole about hers, because as we already revealed about your book, the robots are really good at the beginning and then become troublesome later on without revealing any details or endings. But that must have made it difficult to come up with a satisfying ending, did it?
Yeah, I had to figure out how that was going to get remedied. I was thinking, I've come to writing later in life than some others here in the panel. I published my first novel when I was 67, and just like, so I think, and I had an entire life before that, and I was a project planner. So to me, when I started writing, I thought, okay, too much planning is like work. I don't want it to be like work. So what I did, I think it's more like Stacy, Alexia. I agree with you that I got to have a beginning, got to have an ending, and I got to have some points in between. But other than that, I really love that phase of free writing that comes, and so I knew that they were going to have to get troublesome. I kind of knew how that was going to happen. But actually, the trajectory of that in between, it changed a lot over the process of writing the book, and how it was solved changed a lot. And as a matter of fact, in the very last throes, I rewrote the entire second half of the book. So it happens, and I think that's why I think that this over planning doesn't work for me. It's like, just like John's experience, like if I had just had all these outlines and everything, and you spent all this time on it, and then you get there and you have to throw it all out, it would have been too much. So
yeah, I'm pretty lazy about everything, including writing, and I still have not figured out which way you end up doing less rewriting. If you've got it all planned out and then you divert from the plan, or if you have no plan and then you get somewhere and you have to go back and change everything that came before. But TL, you write, courtroom dramas and legal cases, murders, and obviously the audience wants justice to prevail. So how does that affect your ability to choose an ending?
Well, I mean, I think that everyone in a mystery wants. You're right. In a courtroom drama, they want justice of some kind. I was all set for the planning question there, Al. Thanks.
You have to back into it.
No, but I think people want the innocent to be freed. They want the bad guy to get put away. They want the crime to be solved. That's not always what happens in criminal cases.
But when you start out, do you know, so to speak, what story you want to tell, what outcome you want there to be?
I do, for the most part. In the courtroom, surprises are, your worst nightmare, right? Never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Right. I have my defendant on the stand and I ask a question, and it's like I feel like sometimes it's rolling a baby carriage out into a street, right? You're hoping that it gets to the other side, given what answer I'm going to get to my question. But the reason why I'm a writer and trying to wean myself off of being an attorney is because I love to write creatively. And the law promotes this incredibly boring, turgid type of writing. And so I'm sort of at in a quandary, because I need a plan, right? So I do plot it out, but I have to say, some of the funnest moments I've had in the middle of the book is saying, "Ooh, what if this happens at the end?" Right? And that's great fun for me. So I'm never going to close myself off to endings that are unexpected.
Yeah, I'll say in my first book, I knew, I think I did know what the ending would be, and I stuck pretty close to it. But some readers wanted a different ending. And I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers, but they wanted the victory to be more complete than it was. And of course, if that had been the case, I wouldn't have anything to write about in the second book. So I kind of carried it over, which also brings me to the next subject I want to talk about. How many of you either have written or intend to write a series? I know Alexia has. OTL is going to John. Okay, so Alexia, the most experienced, I think, among us at writing a series. How do you, we talk about bringing readers along through a book. How do you bring readers along from one book to the next and avoid my problem of not providing a satisfying ending while you're trying to cliffhang it on to the next book that comes out a year later?
Well, and again, this is partly a function of the type of series, the subgenre of series that I write, but the mystery itself is contained within the pages of that one book. So, somebody finds a dead body at the beginning, and by the end, they know who killed that person. But because it's a series and a lot of the characters are recurring, I can have subplots and arcs that cover, several books. So the readers come, you could pick up one of my books in the middle of the series, and if you were just interested in the mystery would be solved in that book. But if you were more interested in the characters and the character development, or the town or the side characters, then you would, start at the beginning and follow that through the series. So by having the recurring characters, I can overlap several books to keep people coming back. But the mystery itself being contained gives you that satisfying ending you want within that one book.
John, is that what you do or plan to do?
Yeah, very similar in a lot of ways. And I think that what makes the series for me isn't the actual plot over 3 books, doesn't unfold over 3 books, but there are connections between the 3 books that some readers would find intriguing. I don't want to give it away or ramble on too much, but I think like those connections within the stories that connect to the other books and other worlds that kind of intersect makes people want to explore the other books. If I have a conversation about somebody, say, hey, the character here, and they went to that weird place, well, there's a whole other book about it you can explore. Oh, that's cool. And if somebody goes to the second book, they can go back to the first and then explore another kind of aspect of that story too. But again, like Alexia said, they're all self-contained too.
Yeah, I like to think my books are self-contained, but there are definitely characters and arcs that go through, and there's a twist in the third book that you will understand if you only read the third book, but you'll appreciate it much more if you've read the other 2. So, Stacy, what do you do to solve this conundrum of having a satisfying book, but also an intriguing series?
Well, the only series that I've written are a series of short stories for Women's World magazine. And much like Alexia, they were self-contained. They were You Solve It mysteries. And I tried to keep the characters memorable so that people would want to read another story by them. I think, though, having a character arc over a series in general, I think would be very useful for the readers. Having something about having a character change incrementally between books and then having a large arc at the end would be how I would strive to map out a series, although I have not written one yet.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting or hearing from a reader who picks up my second, or next year my third book, not having read the others, or even somebody who reads number 2 or number 3 and then goes back to read the earlier ones, and to see how well I did at being both self-contained but also having a story arc that's interesting, and even that's interesting enough to make somebody go back and read book 1 after they'd read number 2 or 3. So I don't know, that's a challenge that's still ahead for me.
Say, Al, I noticed that at the beginning of I think it was your third book, you summarized, maybe you did it in the second book too, you summarized a little bit about what had happened, what had gone before. Was that something that you did of your own volition, or did somebody else, an editor, whatever, tell you to do that?
It's a tough balance. And yes, you are one of the authors who read Shockwave and provided an author quote. And I think most of them had not read either of the other books. I think somebody who just picks up Shockwave has to be oriented. Somebody who picks up a book later in a series, they have to have enough in the opening pages to be oriented to the situation and the characters and where they come from and why they do what they do, without boring them. Somebody said something earlier about don't bore us. I mean, yeah, you can't do that. And I recently critiqued a manuscript for somebody where I just thought there was sort of too much of the backstory, and it was fragmentary and confusing, and it left. I thought it was worse than maybe not even having any at all. So yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, has anybody else run into that? Alexia?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I have to put enough in subsequent books so that someone who hasn't read the first book at least knows who these people are and why they should care about them, without rehashing the whole thing for someone who's read the previous books. Like, well, we already know all of this. You could have saved us 50 pages. And also with the backstory, it's common, especially when you're first writing, to want to dump all that backstory that's in your head, because you come up with a lot of little quirks and details and interesting things about your characters, and you want to share them with everybody, not realizing that everybody doesn't want to read that right off the bat. They really do want to get to the chorus. You gotta sort of dole out some of that backstory as you go along. And if you kind of think of people, you don't necessarily you meet someone for the first time. Do you really want to hear their entire life story within 5 minutes of meeting them, or do you want to kind of get to know them and hear that life story, as your relationship develops? So we've all met that challenging,
person, right? Cocktail party. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Don't write that person. You don't want that person to be your protagonist.
And you really, as a writer, I think you want to provide people with information, as they say in the secret world, on a need to know basis. Yeah. That whatever they need to know to understand what person's doing or what's about to happen, that's fine. But otherwise, I mean, it kind of falls into the category of backstory, which is a writerly kind of a term. How much backstory of a character's backstory do you tell? How and when do you tell it? And then as you move through a series, there's more and more of it to tell, which challenges your boiling down ability. That's the way I look at it. So I think of it as a need to know basis. Listen, this has been fun, but we are coming up towards the end of our allotted time. So I just want to go quickly around the screen and give everybody a chance to tell us what they have out now or what they're working on, which is always fun to hear about, or both. And I'll just go in the order that you all are on my screen. So first, it's Stacy.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. Right now, I have a novella that's out. Al mentioned it. It's 2 Tamales, 1 Tokorope, and a Lifetime of Broken Promises through Down and Out Books. It's part of a serialized, a group of serialized novellas from Down and Out Books called Guns and Tacos.
Alexia.
Yeah, as I said, Execution in E is the 5th Gethsemane Brown mystery. I'm not doing that right. But I also have my first short story was just published in This Time for Sure. That's the anthology from the Boucher Con that wasn't. And my second short story, they just had the cover reveal for Malice Domestic's 16th anthology, Murder Most Diabolical. So my 2 most recent things are short stories, which is a whole other experience. And anyone who thinks that short stories are easier than novels, you're wrong.
I think they're easier than novels. I have mad respect for you.
John?
Hi. First of all, Al, great job today. I mean, this has been great, and it's been amazing meeting everybody and hearing about everything you're working on and doing in your methods. Very exciting. I want to check all your work out right after this. My latest release is called Glass House, and it is a metaphysical, strange, psychedelic, weird novella told through prose and song and poetry. I'm always writing, always working on stuff. I have novels coming out, lots of short stories coming out, articles coming out, tons of stuff.
Great. Carole, I know what you're working on, but everybody else doesn't.
Yeah, you've read it, and you were a great beta reader, and I'm still working on that. So I wanted to say regarding endings, a lot of the people didn't like the ending of the Mother Code because they thought it was cut off too short. But my editor said, well, that means they really liked the book and the characters and they wanted to know more. But I am done with that. After writing about them for 8 years, I was done. So my next book is about other characters entirely. And it's going to be about first encounter with alien organisms. And it's something about a little bit about brain evolution, human brain evolution, a couple of topics that just fascinated me over the years. And yeah, I'll talk to you more about all the edits that are going on right now with that. But oh my gosh, I'm in the torture mode right now.
Yeah, a familiar mode. TL, what's next in your legal thriller business?
Thanks. And first, Al, thank you for having me, and thanks to the panelists. I realize now that I don't do enough talking with other authors. It's been very enjoyable, so thank you. So my book is Good Lookin, Joe Turner mystery. And I just signed with Black Rose Writing for the second Joe Turner mystery called Blood Perfect, and it'll be published in July.
Great. Congratulations. Well, thank you, everybody. Alexia Gordon, T.L. Bequette, Stacy Woodson, Carole Stivers, and John Palisano. And thank you to the BookFest team for making this all possible. And also thanks to you who watched us either in the broadcast or on YouTube. I will be on BookFest live author chat later today if you're watching us in real time. That'll be between 4 and 6 Pacific time or 7 to 9 Eastern time. So please tune in to hear some 10-minute behind-the-scenes stories from a variety of authors. I will take you inside the Pentagon to the event that inspired my series. So that's later this evening if you're watching our original broadcast. Again, thank you, everyone. I'm Al Pessin, and I wish you all the best for the rest of BookFest.
Hi. Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Al.